Unhealthy achievement is when we tangle up our self-worth so tightly that we only feel good about ourselves when we achieve. And when we don't achieve, when we have inevitable setbacks, it really becomes an indictment of our worth. Who are the kids who are most at risk for negative health outcomes? Children attending what the researchers were calling high achieving schools. In private schools all around the country, those kids were 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression, and 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse disorder than the average American teen because of the excessive pressure to achieve.
Because I do believe that all of us have very fulfilling lives, and we let these narratives take a hold of us, right? This I don't matter enough, or I'm not good enough. And I do believe that comes from childhood, from the experiences we have. And, early on, like you said, I love what gets in early gets in deep. I mean, that is reality. I mean, it's sticky, it sticks, and it can make us feel either amazing that we can do things and that we have potential, or it can make us feel like we're a failure.
The best thing you could do to raise resilient kids is to be resilient yourself.
Yeah.
And the way we are resilient is by having people who remind us of our worth, who we trust, who, when we are feeling envious or we are feeling less than, we can call and we can have these open conversations.
Welcome back to the Pete's Doc Talk podcast. If you are watching this, you are on my YouTube channel. Please remember to subscribe and to hit that thumbs up sign if you like these conversations, so we can continue to bring you amazing guests on the show, on our YouTube channel, as well as anywhere you listen to podcasts. And today's guest is a 2-time author, Jennifer Wallace. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. In her next book, Mattering: The Secret to a Life of Deep Connection and Purpose, will be published by Penguin Random House in January, so it's out now, everybody. She lives in New York City with her husband and her 3 teenagers, and I'm so excited to have her on to talk about this, raising kids beyond grades, how achievement culture is harming our children. And this is a topic that I am just so passionate about, having grown up in this culture, but also seeing it worse than ever in this generation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jennifer.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
And I love a little backstory on how I found you and why I wanted you on the show. My husband is a big reader. He reads a lot more than I do. I want to read more, but I'm busy with writing stuff for my platforms and momming. And he read your book and he said, "Oh my God, Mona, like this is totally our life. This is what I want to undo for our children and have this perspective." And so he told me, and I obviously found your channel and I said, wow, let's get this woman on my show. And then it just so happens that you have a new book coming out. And we're going to be more talking about the first book that you wrote, but I know we'll probably be alluding to that new book that you have out now. And tell me and our listeners what sort of inspired you in the first place to write your first book, and then even also why you thought that the second book, Mattering, was also useful in this world right now.
Oh, well, that's a great question. So as you mentioned, I'm a mother of 3 teenagers. My oldest is, he's now 20. So 2 teenagers and a 20-year-old.
Nice.
And then I have a daughter who is 18 and another son who's 15. And I was noticing over the years how different my kid's childhood was from my own growing up. Achievement mattered to my parents, but it didn't seem to define my childhood the way it did for so many kids, including my own. And so I was seeing this play out, and I was wondering, why have we become so hyper competitive as a culture in our young people? And so that really led to this exploration. It was multi-year project, traveling all around the country, interviewing parents and families and experts, and shadowing them and meeting parents, and hanging out with them and watching kids over several years, which was really exciting to watch kids in the high school process and how did they do years later once they made it to college. And the second book actually came out of the first book. So many parents that I was talking to for the first book, were talking about how much they themselves were struggling with a lack of self-worth, either from messages in their childhood or working in workplaces where they felt like cogs in a wheel. And so, we'll get into this deeper in the conversation, but the first book was really aimed at adolescents. and that never enough feeling. And the second book is really aimed at adults and the never enough feeling.
Ooh, which obviously is going to continue. And I was so excited to have you on because we grew up in that culture. You mentioned that that wasn't as heavy in your childhood. My husband and I are both the children of immigrant parents. And this is something that a lot of our immigrant peers have dealt with, this achievement oriented culture, right? And I actually had a very good conversation with Prachi Gupta. She wrote a book about the immigrant experience and the mental health issues that have come with that. So if for anyone listening, listen to that episode. I'll make sure to attach it to my show notes. But it gives a little bit more insight as to why immigrants had this sort of mentality of we got to achieve, meaning grades mattered more than anything else. If I did sports, but grades were the epitome. You had to get good education. And it came from that sort of reality that they immigrated here. They had to prove themselves in the 70s and 80s. And if they didn't prove themselves, they could be sent back home to where they came from. So there was this culture of we got to be valuable in society. And for them, value was tied to status in terms of the grades and the careers that we could get, which is why you see a lot of Indian American immigrants, the children, engineers, doctors, lawyers. A lot of us ended up in those careers. And so it was all about grades, resume building, getting into the right schools, and constantly performing. And both me and my husband did not get a lot of emotional intelligence education. We didn't learn about failure. We didn't learn about processing those very deep feelings. And at the time, as children, it felt normal because that's all we knew. That's all our friends knew. But now, as parents of these two small children, 6 years old and 2.5 years old, I can see how that pressure shaped our identities, our stress levels, and even our self worth. And so, what does it look like when a child is growing up in an achievement culture? And how does it often manifest in adulthood, even if it's not immediately obvious?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have the first thing that comes into my head is a quote from Gregory Elliott, who's a sociologist, and he said, "What gets in early gets in deep."
Mm.
And so
Ooh,
the messages, right? It really hits you. The messages that you are sent either at home or in the wider culture, we are absorbing these messages, and it is getting in deep. If you were to think about what does it look like to live in a home that might be hyper focused on achievement. I mean, to be clear, I should start by saying I'm not anti-achievement.
of course. And we'll
I
talk about that too.
love
Yeah. Yeah.
achieving.
Oh, absolutely.
Grades mattered, my performance mattered, but I don't allow it to define myself,
Hmm.
because what in my mind and what I write about in the book is that to be motivated, there are two types of fuel. There's the dirty fuel, which is scarcity, fear, criticism, something that a tired and stressed out and fearful
Yeah.
parent might use to get a kid to study for the Spanish quiz on Thursday. So dirty fuel can do that sort of short term motivational push that we want for our kids. But over time, and the research finds this, is that that dirty fuel clogs the engine and kids burn out. There's also clean fuel.
Hmm.
Clean fuel is a motivator. It is separating the deed from the doer. So you are not your grades. You are not your successes, just like you are not your failures. This doesn't mean, as a parent, to not have expectations. I
Right.
have expectations for my kids, but my expectations are specific to each individual child. I am really focused on getting a PhD in each of my kids, knowing what they are capable of, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what they already have on their plate, what they're going through emotionally, and sort of being that barometer. So, again, just to underscore this, this is not an anti achievement book.
Yeah.
My husband's a high achiever. I'm a high achiever. It's just that there are healthy ways to achieve and less healthy ways to achieve. And what we want to do is raise kids who are able to achieve at high levels for life.
Yeah.
And the way we do this is to set them up, understanding what it is to have a kind of healthy motivation.
Ooh, I love that. And that is exactly, I think, the issue here. And I love that you clarified that because my husband and I are often discussing that healthy balance, right? That I I absolutely want our children to feel that motivation, that internal motivation to want to have to strive for something that makes them happy and they're passionate about. But of course, I don't want that to be tied to anxiety of or fear of failure, which is something that I think is really, really prominent right now. And I dealt with, and I'm very transparent to my followers about that. And that was a source of a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression for me and my husband when expectations didn't meet reality when life hit, right? I got my first C at UCLA, which is a very, very competitive pre med college. I thought my life was over because I was a straight A kid in high school, and it broke me. And I thought that everything was over. And it was that first realization and that self discovery to failure and all of that that really sort of reframed what this achievement culture was and how things are possible even through all of that. And I love that you brought up that this is a achievement book, but how can we do it in a healthy way? And I'm sure you're going to talk about this in your book Mattering. How can this manifest in adulthood? Like what sort of behaviors or what sort of like, tendencies can people who grew up in this achievement culture have, whether it's as an adolescent or as an adult?
So as you were talking about just now, um, unhealthy achievement
Hmm.
is when we tangle up our self-worth so tightly that we only feel good about ourselves when we achieve. And when we don't achieve, when we have inevitable setbacks, it really becomes an indictment of our worth.
Mm,
And that can make us anxious and depressed. I mean, part of the reason that I wrote this book was because I'm a journalist and I was writing an article for the Washington Post and I was covering two national policy reports, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the National Academies of Sciences. And these are written by the country's leading developmental experts. And they were looking at who were the kids who were most at risk for negative health outcomes. And they were, as you would imagine, they were kids living in poverty, children with
mhm,
incarcerated parents, children of recent immigrants with few resources, children living in foster care. And then they named a fifth at-risk group, children attending what the researchers were calling high achieving schools,
yeah,
public and private schools all around the country. Those kids were 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression, and 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse disorder than the average American teen because of the excessive pressure to
wow,
achieve. And the researchers have found this isn't just, the pressure in high school and then it goes away once you get to college. This pressure, this mindset carries young people, it carries through into the 30s. Researchers have found that the seeds of perfectionism get in early and they last, and it travels with you. So for parents, I believe, and the research finds this, that one of the best things we could do for our kids is to help them develop a healthy sense of self.
yeah,
That is the primary task of adolescence, to have a healthy sense of self. And the self becomes stronger, less by being praised, which can feel like pressure,
yeah,
and more by being known for who they are.
mhm,
That's where getting a PhD in them matters, that you see them for the full people they are. Yes, they are achievers. Yes, they want to reach high goals, but they're also really funny. Or they're
yeah,
the friend who is able to read a room and can spot the person who's feeling left out, or the empathy they have for a lonely grandparent, or the environment is an issue for them and so they want to spend some of their time on the weekend helping to recycle or do whatever they can. So we are so much more than our GPA. And when we do that, it's interesting because you would think it was counterintuitive, right? If you
mhm,
were to really want your kid to have this deep, wide, full sense of self, that maybe it would distract them from achievement. But here's what I'm here to tell you, and researchers on perfectionism have found this as well, is that when you have a child who has this healthy sense of self, they are not afraid to reach for high goals.
yeah,
Whereas perfectionists, kids who really feel that sense of self-worth tangled up, they will stop achieving if they think they can't meet it. And so it actually becomes counterintuitive. So if you want your kids to keep striving, keep reaching for the high goals, give them that healthy sense of self and the coping skills to deal with setbacks, which are inevitable.
yeah. Oh, I'm like one of my favorite things about having this podcast is being able to connect with people that just inspire through their words and inspire through their writing. And obviously, you are one of those people. And this is all stuff that I believe so strongly about. And I hope our listeners are really taking this in because this is not hard work to do. It can feel hard to raise children like this. But I speak about, I have a kindergartner, so I'm not in that teenage years, but I do believe that we need to go upstream in how we approach self-worth, right? Self-worth is not created at teenage levels. It's how we communicate things early on. And I use the example that my kindergartner, when he started kindergarten, did not know how to read. Right. And many people could be like, what? He doesn't know how to read? Like my kid was reading at 3 and 4. But what he is really good at is knowing how to ask for help, knowing who he is for a 5-year-old, knowing when something doesn't feel right in his body, which I think is such a good example of what you said, and that raising a child who knows themselves, right? And that is actually part of a book that I'm writing, by the way. So I'll be reaching out to you to help, obviously with that inspiration. But that is something that's so important to me because we can do that in those early years with foundation and obviously build that in those teenage years. But parents often think that, okay, we got to focus on the milestones. We got to focus on, now they're in kindergarten, and that comparison culture, I think, gets really, really wound up. And I don't, you have a 20-year-old as the oldest and then teenagers. Do you feel that it's worse than before? I know you said that from your own experience. And do you think it has to do with the school system, but also social media? Like, what do you think are the triggers of this achievement culture that are ruining us?
That's a really good question. And there are lots of threads
Mm-hmm.
that have reached, have gotten us to this boiling point. But the thread that I think is the most relevant is the economic thread.
Mm.
So when I was growing up, and this sort of relates to your own childhood, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I'm older than you, life was
Mhm.
generally more affordable.
Yeah.
Housing, healthcare, higher education was more affordable. There was slack in the system.
Yeah.
So parents like mine could be relatively assured that even with some setbacks, even with a B plus in AP calculus, like I got my senior year, that most likely I'd be able to replicate
Right.
my own childhood as an adult, if not do even better than my own parents did. That's the American dream. But modern parents are facing a different reality. We are seeing the first generation of millennials who, on average, are not doing as well as their parents.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen the crush of the middle class. We have absorbed the steep inequity in our culture. And parents become, in the words of researchers, social conduits.
Mm-hmm.
So we feel the pressures in our environment and we pass them along to our kids, not out of, to hurt them, but to prepare them
Mm.
for a hyper competitive future that they are going into. So this is not to blame parents,
Yeah.
but what I found so helpful was understanding this macroeconomic story and realizing that parents are not sitting alone in their living rooms making these decisions to push their kids. They are responding to very real pressures. I mean, it's always been the job of a parent to prepare a child to thrive when we're no longer around. But now the world is so uncertain. AI is on the scene. What is
Yeah.
education even going to look like in 10 years?
I
That
know.
is that ROI really going to be there? So it's very uncertain. And so what I will tell parents is, as a parent, I wanted to know for the book, who are the kids who are doing well despite all of these pressures in the environment? What did their parents focus on at home? How did they experience school? What were their relationships like with their peers? How did they deal with this social comparison that you asked about on social media? And I found about a dozen or so threads that these healthy strivers, as I call them in the book, had in common. But it boiled down to this, that the kids who were doing well, despite the pressure, felt like they mattered
Mm-hmm.
for who they were deep at their core, away from their achievements and successes. And just as importantly, they were relied on to add value back at home through chores, at school through tasks and activities, in the wider community through volunteer work. So this mattering, feeling valued and adding value acted like a protective shield. These kids still experience setbacks. They still didn't make it to the party. They weren't invited to the party on Friday night,
Yeah.
but these were not indictments of their worth. They knew they mattered no matter what. Do I think social media is making things worse? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I think social media is the root of the problem? I do not.
Mm-hmm.
Social media filled a need, and there was a need in our environment. There was this huge gap, neighborhoods no longer cohesive, children, grown children moving away from their families, not having a sense of community, not having a support system. Tech And so this loneliness epidemic, tech tried to fill that need to make money, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't believe it is the cause, but it is certainly an accelerant and a magnifier. We have evolved to be social comparison creatures. We
Yeah.
all evolved to feel envy for healthy adaptive reasons, right? To our earliest ancestors, envy was a sign that someone had something that we thought was critical for our survival. And so our bodies would be hijacked and focused on what it is, and those painful pangs were there to say, focus in on that thing. You need that to survive. So we don't have to judge ourselves for feeling envy, which we all feel, but we have to hold ourselves accountable for how we act on that envy. And this is what I teach my own children, that when feelings of envy bubble up, we have two choices. We can take the benign envy, we could take the malicious envy route, let's
Yeah.
say. This is what researchers call malicious envy, where you want to undercut someone so you look better by comparison. So that's gossiping about them, being rude about them. Or you could take the benign envy route, which is really a motivator. We could look at the source of our envy and say, I so admire you. How
Yeah.
did you get there? We could sort of unlock their mattering in that way. We could be saying out loud, I so value what you've accomplished. Oh boy, I'd love to try to do it too. That is how we maintain and protect friendships. So we can teach our kids these skills on how to manage envy. So many adults were not taught that. So many adults were not taught, and we're ashamed to feel envy. Give up on that shame.
Yeah.
That's an adaptive response that got you here, right? Recognize it and recognize that it's going haywire because you are not meant to be socially comparing yourselves to tens and thousands of people online,
Yeah.
and just be kind to yourself and say, that's my envy talking, and help your kids not feel that shame either so that they can, respond to it in healthier ways.
So true. And I mean, I have the personal example of having an online educational platform, right? And I have been creating videos and content, and social media as a creator is goes against everything that you would want to build self-worth, even if you have the metrics, right? Because you're always thinking about what other people are doing. It's comparison culture, it's metrics, it's external validation, trolls. I mean, it is the antithesis of everything that I wanted to be as a human being. And giving you that example, when I started, and I was doing well and I was creating valuable content, I would see other people in my parenting space, millions of followers, 2 million followers, and I would feel like, what is wrong with me, right? That lesser than feeling. And you sometimes forget your why when you're focusing so much on that. And I told myself exactly what you said. I'm like, I can be envious of that, but I'm going to use it to get curious. So what I did instead is I got curious as to what are they doing that maybe is better for social media that I haven't discovered yet. And being able, and that goes back to what I teach a lot of in my younger age group, like younger than 10 is kind of my niche here. And I hope to continue to evolve to let it be teenagers as well, because I love teenage conversations. Is whenever we take a feeling, right, like my kid's frustrated, my whatever it is, how are we going to say that this feeling is okay, envy is okay, frustration is okay, and how are we now going to channel it to something else, whether it's I need to release this feeling, whether it's something productive, whether it's something that my body is telling me a cue and I need to rest. It's so important that we don't push those feelings down. And I love how you normalize envy, because I also used to be shamed for feeling envy. Like, oh well, why am I jealous? Like, I have everything. I shouldn't feel jealous. Like, I should be grateful. That whole, and I'm like, I am grateful, but I'm also obviously feeling jealous, and it's okay to feel jealous. But what am I going to do with it? And I love that example, because that is something that I think we all as adults, and I love this book that's coming out with Mattering, because I think so many of adults need to undo this to live a more fulfilling life. Because I do believe that all of us have very fulfilling lives, and we let these narratives take a hold of us, right? This I don't matter enough, or I'm not good enough. And I do believe that comes from childhood, from the experiences we have. And, early on, like you said, I love that quote you mentioned. I wrote it down. So I want to, what gets in early gets in deep. I mean, that is reality. I mean, it's sticky. It sticks, and it can make us feel either amazing that we can do things and that we have potential, or it can make us feel like we're a failure. And I see that in my husband, I see that in myself, and I think it's so healthy that these conversations are happening.
Well, I'd love to tell you what I have found to be the best way of repairing that
Mm-hmm.
is that sort of fractured sense of self-worth is to find one or two or three people in your life who you can be vulnerable with,
Mm-hmm.
who you can open up to, and who will open up to you. What you find in the research, and this is according to decades worth of resilience research, is that the best thing you could do to raise resilient kids is to be resilient yourself.
Yeah. I
And the
love
way
that.
we are resilient is by having people who remind us of our worth, who we trust, who, when we are feeling envious or we are feeling less than, we can call and we can have these open conversations. That there was a study out of the Mayo Clinic that was looking at busy physician mothers
Mm-hmm.
and who were also caregivers. And they found that meeting just 1 hour a week with a small group of people who let them feel seen and known and cared for was enough to increase resilience, lower cortisol, and the physician mothers also reported feeling like better parents. And so we all know that a child needs a sturdy adult to thrive, but sturdy adults need other sturdy adults to keep them sturdy. So, I think there are people, and I certainly was like this, who might hesitate to reach out for help, who might hesitate to open up. I can tell you, because I've been doing this research now, and I write about this extensively in the second book, that is our way out of these feelings of a lack of self worth. And so instead of thinking of reaching out as an imposition on somebody, I
Yeah.
have come to see it as a way of making the other person feel like they matter.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone reaches out to you for help, don't you feel like, wow, they really respect my judgment. They really
Yes.
trust me. That is, when we hold that back, that is selfish on our
Yeah.
part. Actually, reaching out for help is a way of unlocking other mattering. And just to underscore this visual, we are often told as caregivers to put our oxygen masks on first. But what resilience research finds is it goes deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Friends are the oxygen.
Yeah.
We need people who know when we are struggling, who are close enough that they could reach over and put the oxygen mask on for us. And that is a very different level of support than we normalize in our culture today. And I'm not saying that you need to go out 5 nights a week with your mom friends.
Yeah.
The research out of the Mayo Clinic, and it has since been replicated, you need 1 hour of deliberate time a week to feel seen and heard, just like you try to be for your kids. We are the first responders to our kids' struggles. And we need to replenish ourselves if we are going to be those sturdy sources of support.
Oh, I love that. It's so so true, and I love that you're reminding people of the importance of community and that we cannot do anything alone. And I think, a lot of my listeners are mothers. A lot of my listeners are mothers who feel like they need to do things on their own, and that includes managing these feelings alone and managing all the negative, the positive, but just not understanding that we need to rely on our community. And I love that you also said that it doesn't take a lot of people. It doesn't take a lot. I have that one friend that literally is my go-to girl. Like when I was feeling down about whatever, platform stuff, business stuff, she's the one, and she's also an entrepreneur. And we'll chat about things about like business and life. And it's such a positive feeling to have that. And our children need that too, right? Exactly that example. Like when they're failing, yeah, we're human beings. We need that community. We cannot rely on going through feelings alone, I think is a big message here.
That's exactly right. And we need to model that for our kids. When
Yeah.
we're going through something hard, we need to not just model it, but I talk about living my life out loud. When I am going through something hard, I will say, I lost my dad a few months ago. And whenever I was having a hard feeling, I would say, you know what? I'm going to go call my girlfriend and I'm going to talk to her about it. That they see me and I normalize reaching out for support, and that is a brave thing to do, and that we are worthy of support. There's a phrase that I have in the book from Ned Hallowell, who's a psychiatrist: never worry alone.
Mhm.
And I live that. I want my kids. I think if we could adopt that as an idea, boy, we could really make headway with the mental health issues that we are seeing today. Never worry alone. That is what our kids need from us. That is what we need for ourselves.
Oh, So many pearls, so many quotes that I'm already like just living off of right now. Thank you so much. And you had talked about this already, about this sort of balance, right? This, we can create this sense of drive and desire for achievement, but also not let it define us, right? And I think that's such a really important message that hit home for me, both as a pediatrician and a mother. And I use the example that, my husband and I are thinking about relocating, and we want to live in an area with a very strong school system. But part of that means there's a lot of these school systems, whether it's public or private, are very achievement focused, right? We see this. We see these children who are overscheduled. We see that their parents are still valuing that so many different activities, so many different things. They're in AP classes, all of the stuff to get into college, like you said, to have that sort of performative ability to hopefully end up getting a good job or whatever the final goal is. But what practical strategies can parents use, especially in these communities where they're trying to build a strong sense of self worth that isn't tied to grades, trophies, or performances, but they also don't want their children to feel like they're left out or falling behind or not comparing to their peers? Like, how is that balance? Where is that where they're in a system where everyone's doing what we're not wanting to do?
So I actually asked that very question to a researcher named Tim Kasser, who studies values and how they
Hmm.
impact our well-being. And I said to him, I live in Manhattan. It's a very hyper-competitive culture.
Yes.
Short of moving out, what can I do? And he
Yeah.
said, I don't buy the premise of your question. If you knew there was lead in the pipes and you could afford to leave, would you leave your kids in that environment?
Hmm.
I remember, thank God we were on the phone because I got all red in the face and I was thinking to myself, I'm not in New York and
Yeah.
what am I doing to my kids? And then he said, but if you're not going to leave, then you need to be very extra deliberate about
Mm.
communicating your family's values day in and day out. That conversations about values are not a 1 hour lecture a year. They need to be sprinkled into our everyday conversations, just like we do other risky behaviors. And here's why I call values risk behaviors, because what we
Mhm.
know from researchers, and I'll oversimplify this for time, is that all of us, no matter where we live in the world, have a dozen core values inside of us. Split up, researchers split them into intrinsic values, things like being wanting to be a good neighbor, spirituality, wanting to grow,
Yeah.
versus extrinsic values, things materialistic values, wanting the big house, the name brand college, etc. Values operate like a zero sum game. So the more time and energy you spend in your life pursuing intrinsic values, the less room you have in your life for pursuing the extrinsic ones. And here's why this matters, because extrinsic values are linked with negative mental health and substance abuse disorder,
Mhm.
whereas intrinsic values are linked with the well-being we want for ourselves and for our kids. So what I would say to parents is, if you are living in one of these communities, as am I, is to be explicit with yourself about how you define success. Look at your calendar. Look at how much money you spend in your own life. Does your time, attention, and money reflect those values? If you say your family is the most important thing, are you having family dinners? Are you
Yeah.
carving out together time on the weekends? Or are you spent going in a million different directions, pursuing travel, soccer, chess tournaments, etc.? So be really clear about what your values are, communicate them with your kids, and then find a couple of families that share your values. What has been so impactful for my kids, I think the most impactful, is who I surround myself with. And the adults I point out as living the successful lives in the way I define it,
Yeah.
not because of where they went to college, not because of, what their job title is, but because they are living a life. And in my mind, what is the ultimate, our sort of family value is the Jesuit motto, which is not better than others, but better for others.
Mm.
We are successful not to be better than others, but to be better for others, because we know there are genuine needs in the world.
Yeah.
We know it is our responsibility to fill those needs. Doesn't mean I don't like shiny objects. Doesn't mean I don't want to, write a book that is in the hands of lots of readers. But the point of these things is that I want to help shift the conversation, not that I need to hit the New York Times bestseller list. So it's really about how the lens you use to view your successes, and what is the fuel that is driving you. Is it intrinsic? Is it extrinsic? And just get clear on it,
Yeah.
and have those friends near you so that when you feel yourself being pulled off course, when you say, why, remind me, I used to call my friend Katie when my kids were little, remind me why we're not doing travel soccer this
Yeah.
summer. And she would say to me, because you value your time together as a family, your kids are young, you're never getting this time back. You want your downtime on your weekends. That is why you're not doing travel soccer. I'm like, that is why I'm not doing travel soccer. So you need to surround yourself with people who will keep you on track, because you are living in a culture that will constantly be pulling you away.
Yeah, very good advice. And this is so helpful as people kind of think about, their futures and their children and what they want. And I always talk about value-driven parenting, but sometimes I can forget about obviously when your children get older, right? We think so much about our child-centric values, like what do I want my child to have? But then we sometimes forget about, well, they are going to go into the world and their peers are going to have a very big impact, right? And the cars that those kids are driving, the clothes, whatever they're saying, that can be different, and we cannot control how people parent their children, but we can only control what values we bring into our family hold. And I think that is great advice. And I think that final question I have for you, which I could talk about this forever, but for the sake of time, is maybe even from your own examples or from the book, how you feel we can create that sort of balance, promoting healthy work ethic, intrinsic motivation, without accidentally making our kids feel like they're not good enough, and that balance of achievement, but also not losing themselves and their sense of worth in the process.
So I think, there are lots of ways we could do this, but one way that has been really helpful to me is that when I find my kids are not achieving or making choices that I think are not in their best interest, like
Hmm.
playing video games instead of studying, I get curious and not furious, like you
Mm.
talked about earlier. I assume, because guess what? All kids want to do well and all adults want to do well. And just you have to make that assumption. So if you have a child who is not doing well, get curious. Try to
Yeah.
figure out what's going on. And there are lots of ways, and I get into it at length in the book on how to get curious instead of furious. And I would say for yourselves as well, when you are
Yeah.
feeling that never enough feeling, don't feel shamed, get curious. I say this when I go and I travel and I speak with high school kids. I say the next time you feel like you're never enough, think about who's profiting off of making you feel that way.
Yeah.
Because there's someone behind that feeling, and they all go, oh, wow. Like, they love to know that. So think about for yourself as an adult, who is profiting off of that? So, if I were to leave you with one thing, I would say the best way you can make your kids feel like they matter, that protective shield, is for you to go upstream and find a way for you to develop your own sense of mattering, your own sense of feeling valued, and knowing how you add value to the world. Honestly, if I were to have written these books, I wish would have written the adult one that's coming out now
Makes yeah.
first, so that parents can go into their own psychological addicts, understand where these messages are coming from, help them connect with their mattering. I call it building up a mattering core, because mattering is not my idea. It's been in the literature since the 80s, but it's been locked away in the ivory tower. So how can we really build up our sense of mattering so that we could be those sturdy sources of support and help our kids develop their own sense of mattering too?
I love it. I lied. I have another question. So I was like, I can't stop there. I think it's so awesome. My If you had it your way, how would you wish society would redefine the word achievement?
Oh, again, if I were to, I mean, it would be achieving for others.
Mm,
Because when we can turn our self-focused lens outward and notice our strengths and notice the genuine needs in the world and meet those needs. I used to say, I want my kids to be happy. I no longer say that.
yeah.
I want them to know how to matter in the world, because that is the pathway to happiness, to healthy achievement, to community, to deep connection, to deep purpose, is knowing how to matter. And there are actionable ways to know how to matter. Mattering is the secret to life.
Yeah.
That's what I have found out. And it has changed my life in so many ways. And I will devote the rest of my life to spreading the word about mattering, because it is so transformative for families, for schools, for communities, for workplaces.
Yeah.
Its power is so vast. So teaching our kids how to matter to their friends, to their family, to the wider community, that to me is success.
Oh, I love that. And when people hear that, they may think, well, when we're doing things for others, we're not doing things for self. But you just made it perfectly clear in this entire episode that by doing those things and thinking about the greater good, that is true value in our life. I mean, going back to the examples of you writing this book and the work that you're doing and the speaking engagements you do, although those are all fun, beautiful things that I can look at from the outside, what I'm getting from Jennifer Wallace is that your impact, the fact that you hear children say the things that they do back to you, that is what is mattering, right? That value that you are bringing to somebody's life. And I think that message is so important, right? That it's not about, although that's for you a little bit, although that's, giving you purpose in this world, you have changed the lives of so many people. And if we all had that, how beautiful of a world would this be that we all cared enough to help others?
And we need this in our world. The reason we're
Yes.
in this crisis today is because people don't know how to matter.
Yeah.
Um, and so, anyway, the Mattering book will teach you how to find genuine needs, small needs, how to rebuild your sense of mattering. I would love to leave your listeners with something that is sometimes so helpful to me when my kids are struggling and I'm
Hmm.
struggling as a parent, and I feel so caught up in all of it and the achievement culture and the traps that
Yeah.
they put us in. I think about my children 10 or 20 years from now. What is the story I want them to tell about their childhood and about their relationship with me?
Yeah.
And then I ask myself, am I helping them tell that story? So that to me is that is an exercise that I tap into, particularly when times are fraught.
So much wisdom. I love that we were able to do this today. I am so excited for your book. It is out now, but please tell everyone where they can get the new book, the first book that you have, and also how to stay connected with all the amazing work that you do and the speaking engagements you're doing and all of that fantastic information you share with the world.
Oh, thank you so much. So you could find me on Instagram at Jennifer Burhenny Wallace. You can find me on my website, Jennifer B. Wallace. Sign up for my newsletter. Lots of advice for how to help our kids in this achievement culture, how to help ourselves in this achievement culture. Those are sort of the two big ways of finding me. LinkedIn, if you're active on LinkedIn, you can find me there as well. And the book is available anywhere books are sold.
I am going to be linking all of that, including obviously where to get the book, Mattering, as well as the book that we talked about today in more detail. Because again, I love that we focused on her first book, which was Never Enough When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic, which is more geared towards our teenagers, younger children. But like she said, mattering matters to adults too. And we have to undo those insecurities and those reservations that block us from showing up for our children, which is another reason why I'm so happy to have you here, because I'm always talking about how I can't educate you on tantrums if I can't help you why you're struggling with regulation during their dysregulation. Like, what is that barrier? Why
It's
are
true.
you forcing food into your child? What insecurities do you have about their bodies or their weight? And so all of it comes back to self reflection. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What a great resource for parents. I wish I had this when I was raising my kids. So thank
And
you for all you do.
thank you. And I know if you're tuning into this episode, you learned so much and you are feeling inspired. Like I said, I love having guests that really are sharing the positive nature of parenting. Like you heard Jennifer say, like she looks back and she thinks, what do I want my children to remember? That is such an important value that I want every one of you to do. And we talk about that all the time on my platform. So if you love this conversation, you have two things you need to do. You have to hit that thumbs up sign. You have to subscribe to the channel because I am going to continue bringing amazing guests, and I'm sure Jennifer back on the show because we can chat again. And please make sure to share this conversation with people in your lives, maybe your partner, maybe someone who doesn't share this philosophy, but you want to help them understand why they can create that balance, that maybe they're living in fear that their child won't succeed. But let's redefine what success is. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us, and I cannot wait to chat with another guest next time.